Tonight we're fortunate to have Ken Mehar, Chairman of HASSELL, James Grose as National Director of BVN, who will speak about their two projects at Docklands. Thank you again for coming. Ken.
But I do want to talk a little bit about design thinking. I mean, Paul has talked about this issue of practice and theory, and this is not a theoretical presentation. It's really more about trying, when I talk about projects, try to talk about how we think, because I think that helps, hopefully, people understand the project a little more. I think the thing about the ANZ project for us, it's like all projects, it's a long project. It started 4.5 or 5 years before it was completed, and when you look back, it's a big lump of time when you think about these projects, and it's amazing that when they end up, they're anything like where you started. And what I like about projects, I guess, is that when you do start, it's a bit of a blank sheet and you're leaping into a new arena each time. Because for me, in working with design projects, there are sort of 3 overlapping interests, and I think they all need to somehow be a little bit in balance. And one is the place that you're working in, the site, or however the context, etc. The other is clearly the client who drives, and that client can be interpreted as the day-to-day client or the public at large, the kind of people in the future who might use the building. And thirdly, your own preoccupations, your own kind of thinking, why you've been, as a practice, asked to do it as opposed to others. And but this project was very deeply engaged in that conversation with and input from the client and their desire to make this a place that was critical to their future. The design directors were myself, Robert Backhouse, who really led the interior design team, and Darren Kindrechuk from Lend-Lease Design. I was going to start by talking about where we began with the project, and at the very early stages we were engaged with DEGW to develop a brief for the building and to work with developing ANZ's workplace guidelines. So it was done very much around a process of engagement with a team of people at ANZ, and they had strong aspirations about the way this might change their way of working, their way of thinking, and it was, in a sense, a cultural shift for ANZ. But we did lots of workshops. We did that terrific thing of going on a global tour with some of our client, high-level client people within ANZ, and really it was about looking at what things had happened in other parts of the world, but learning more from the conversations as much as we did from the work. But you can see here from these words that they really were wanting to shift the way they worked, the way they used the workplace, and they were very conscious of the fact of a significant change in generational, in age profile that was occurring within the bank. This is the sort of foundation of the brief that was developed by us with ANZ and DGW. But essentially they wanted an urban campus. They wanted floor plates of hopefully up to 3,000 square metres. They wanted a central place. They wanted connectivity. They wanted equity of amenity with all their people. Security is a big thing with banks, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think we broke some new ground in the area of security. They recognised that banks generally have an issue about the perception in the public of them, and they wanted to be seen to be and to be accessible, and so there's a dimension of community engagement. And DGW developed this sort of spoken or hub and spoke model where they wanted to bring people together in a central place and to have places that others could go. So I was going to talk firstly just a bit about the form of the building, because I think in parallel to this, the workplace and the thinking of the workplace, we had a site down in Docklands and had to think a lot about how we would bring together the broader thinking, this broader brief to this site. We were starting to explore ideas as to how would you make a large workplace, a consolidated workplace, around the idea of a central atrium, using really thin floor plates where we could draw light and air into the building, and work with this rather awkwardly shaped site as well, defined by Collins Street Collins Landing, which is at the southern side, and the river. And so we started with this idea of these kind of linear strands of building that sort of folded around and stepped back from the edge of the river itself. This could be a slightly organic building in its form, and they were very keen to sort of have a certain softness, if you like, to the building. And I guess the other one then was developing more consolidated thinking about the workplace and about the DNA, if you like, of this building as a place. I mean, it's a building for 6,500 people. It's bigger than many significant country towns. And so our feeling was that it has to operate as a part of the city. We also had a Future Laboratory working with us out of London, where they were trying to represent the aspirations of a future group of people who might work in this building. The notion of a permeable place of some sort and its publicness was really important to us. And in fact, this very critical central experience within the workplace was very much about the public domain. We felt that the real issue about a sustainable workplace here was about building that sense of interaction and community. And also, I guess, you know, maybe it's a sort of sad fact that we all work for so long that there's this merging between the idea of personal life and work life. So how do you make a workplace feel as comfortable, as engaging as your home might be? It's very much about the publicness of the places that you come into and the central spaces of the building. And that publicness was also reinforced by the notion that there had been a street in the middle of this block, and so we made the sense of that street, which is shown in part here, through the building and it's actually a public route through the building. The public can go up through the building and out, and that was a really key shift, because ANZ wanted to welcome the public into the building, but their security people said you can't possibly have public coming into the middle of the building and looking up and seeing people working in the building. This is not going to work. Luckily, the client for the project really was the management board, and we were able to through Jane Hamilton, make regular presentations to the CEO and senior management board, and they got it. They understood. You know, in a sense, for the upper parts of the building, you're always looking back down at the common place, and we call it the commons. And the commons, you know, a sort of cheesy way of referring to it would be the sort of the town square or the village centre, but it is the place where people do come together. They arrive and move through it. And it has a publicness to it in the way we dealt with materials. The ground plane was using the urban materials of Melbourne. And scale was a big issue, and when I talk about the architecture or the exterior of the building, I'll talk about that a little bit as well. But we needed to think about how to, we've got these three cores, but how to develop a sense of intimacy within these floor plates. And it was a bit to do with the way that we thought about arrival. So the whole structure of the workplace, the structure of the spatial experience is about engagement and interconnection. The hubs are the places where you filter through in going to your workplace and where you might engage and connect with. But they were built around a series of kind of themes where their character was quite strong, and they were playful. We got some of the younger designers in the studio each to take ownership of one of those spaces, and we saw there'd be places that would change. And we had a series of themes around them that really drove colour and as well as the design elements within them. There's a lot of deliberate modelling of the spatial qualities of the building, using this kind of folded form of the building to be at that very point, that sort of vortex, if you like, of the river and the parklands and the city. But importantly, the idea of the kind of expressing the linear sense of the organisation of the building. And so there's a kind of almost like a slicing of the forms where you reveal the cross-section, where there's a sort of verticality to the east and west ends and a horizontality to the northern and southern. Again, the way the building scales down to the street and to the lower urban furniture elements of the street was quite important to us, and the way that makes the street front and the kind of traditional awning condition of the street itself. Again, an important part, we think, of a building its response to the urban fabric. On the lower parts of the building, we're very keen to engage in the materiality of the docklands. And so we use this very gutsy recycled timber cladding, which wraps around to the pavements of the waterfront itself. And we introduce these landscape elements that wrap from the podium over into the walls. So we're starting to mediate, if you like, the building to the parkland. Clearly, there was a sort of strategy to the passive protection of the skin of the building. We did a lot of analysis with ARIPS on that. We're lucky with the site in the sense that the buildings are generally running north-south, so we can control the heat loads quite well. And we have these horizontal sun shading devices which change as the orientation of the building shifts, and it helps give that linear fluidity to the building. And then on the east-west, we have a combination of vertical and horizontal. Again, high levels of shading, but from within the building, you feel quite a high level of connection to the outside. When we're working on the building, it shifted from a 5-star Green Star rating to a 6-star Green Star rating a year, but they're part of a story. But for us, importantly, I think the issue of sustainability, as I said early on, is about the way people operate within the building and the way you build a community within the building, and the way that we organise movement through the building for people to engage, and importantly, longevity. So that's the story of the building. Thank you.